The news business has gone through some major changes in recent years. How, when, and where we get our news is likely to change even more in the coming years. We'll explore those options, but in the meantime, charges of bias and even fake news are making headlines, leading some to wonder, has objectivity left journalism? We'll talk about that and some other issues, but first, a welcome to this edition of Central here on Fox 68 and My 43. I'm Daniel Pluff. Thanks for joining us. And if ever there was a timely issue to get into, certainly this is it, given what we're hearing from our new president and members of the press. A lot to talk about, as well as I mentioned some of the changes that are taking place. Two great guests, local experts, joining us to give their opinions as well as address some of these issues. We're delighted to have both. I want to first welcome to the program Tim Kennedy. Tim is president of Syracuse Media Group and Advance Media New York. More familiar, perhaps known, Post-Standard and Syracuse.com here locally. But Tim, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure meeting you, and I know you can weigh in on a number of these topics, but welcome.
Great. Thank you. Great to be here.
Also joining us, Lorraine Branham, who is the Dean of the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University. I can say this with complete objectivity, the finest broadcasting school in the nation. But Dean Branham, welcome to you. And as we were talking earlier, what I didn't know, 25 years as a journalist as well, so Absolutely. You certainly bring some background to this as well. And I don't think I was being biased about Newhouse, was I?
Absolutely not.
Okay, very good. Very good. We're off to a good start.
I agree.
Here's the thing, and you know, I tend to over prep for this stuff, but on this show in particular, I think, boy, there's so much going on. Not just changes in how we receive news, but we have a new, and some might argue, a very different type of president now. And it seems, Tim, I'll let you start it off, it seems like there is a heightened level of friction or antagonism between the president and the press.
Sure.
Are you sensing it? And if so, why? What's the reason here?
Well, I think everyone is sensing
Sure.
it. I think there's a fair conversation going on in the community across the country, for sure, about the president and his rhetoric. But I think at this point it is largely rhetoric, and we can talk about why he engages in that rhetoric. And I may find much of it appalling from a rhetorical standpoint. But I think the thing to focus on is, you know, how much of this translates into action. So to the extent that we begin to lock out certain organizations or journalists from engaging in news gathering, that becomes problematic, and it becomes problematic to the extent that you...
I'm sure you both have an issue on that, but back to maybe why. Is it just this argument of those who maybe have a more conservative bias versus those who might be more liberal? Is that what it's all about with this president? Or is there something different there that I'm missing?
Well, I think everyone has a theory about what's going on here. I think at a real broad level, you know, the president talks again rhetorically in wide sweeping pronouncements, and you know, journalism at its heart is about truth telling. And so I think that what we try to do on a day in and day out basis, both at the local level and of course at the national level, is try to get to the truth and try to get to facts and tell stories based on that. And the president tends to talk in wide sweeping sort of rhetorical language.
Dean Branham, go ahead. I've got to follow up here.
You know, just to follow up on that, I think presidents have always had difficult relationships with the press.
But that's where I was. That's where I was headed.
Has been much more vocal about his dislike of the press, his feelings that the press is not always nice to him. The press had lots of problems with President Obama and many of the things that he did.
Well,
the press was not always good to George Bush.
Here's where I was going with you on that, because I'm hearing, you know, and as I was preparing for this, people knew I was doing the show. Oh, you have to ask this, you have to. But here's one thing: they would say, "Oh, it's the worst now it's ever been." You know, I'm old enough to remember there was quite a bit of friction between a President Nixon and a reporter by the name of Dan Rather, if you recall that. So,
absolutely.
So is it, you know, is it different this time?
It's different this time because this president seems to, at least in his rhetoric, try to delegitimize the press and position the press as the enemy, not just the enemy of his administration, but the enemy of the people. And there's this idea that the press doesn't have the right to question the president, to question what the president is doing.
Right.
And I think that is a lot different than in the past.
All right, I've got something for you on that too. But is this relationship between president and press, or for that matter, politicians and press, isn't this sort of the classic symbiotic relationship? They both need one another, right? the politicians want to get their message out, and the press wants to question them. I mean, isn't that what it comes down to?
Well, I think everyone has a job to do, right? If you're a politician, your job is, at one level, to advocate for your policies and to convince people that your policies are the right prescriptions for the community, be that local or be that on a national stage. And again, journalism is about telling the truth, telling stories based on the truth, and there's an adversarial relationship that has always existed from the earliest days of the country.
Here's my follow-up to that, though. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to say to you, you're reporters in the field and broadcast. Really, is the job of reporters, journalists, is it to report on, and again, talking politics for a minute, is it to report on what the politician is saying or attempting to do, or is there more emphasis on looking for the expose, to expose something?
Well, I think that the press has a responsibility to dig deep and to investigate and to try to find out if it's more than what they're being told. I mean, there is a reason that the founders created a First Amendment and set up the press as the fourth estate, that is supposed to be a check on government. So we're not supposed to be press agents. We don't sit there and just consume everything that we're given and then go away and write what we're told. We examine it. We look into it. We verify the facts.
So moments ago, Tim sort of went in that direction. Dean Branham, I'll ask you, do you feel President Trump, as some have charged, is he essentially infringing upon the First Amendment?
I think what he has done is question whether or not that protection applies in his case, and whether or not, because he is president, he should get a pass.
There were cases, and maybe that's what you're alluding to, Tim. I'm not sure. There were cases or reports anyway of him excluding certain reporters from certain events, or the. His name escapes me, but the press secretary,
Sean Spicer,
thank you,
yes.
Had excluded certain members of certain types of organizations.
Yes.
And maybe there's a problem with that, do you think?
Well, I think that there are problems when at any level when the government begins to exclude access to what it should be the information of the people. They represent the people, and that's, again, as Dean Branham said, that's why we have freedom of press. That's why we have freedom of speech. But when that begins to happen, then I think you are getting closer to that line. So at any level, if a politician is excluding a reporter from a press conference, from some position of gaining information and facts that can help them then tell the story and do what we do, yeah, that becomes problematic.
And I'll just end on this particular segment again. Maybe and Dean Branham touched on it, but Tim, I'm not sure if we heard from you. It does seem to some, and I raised my hand, it does seem that it is a little different now. The Nixon issues that you mentioned, President Obama, others, but boy, you just feel the tension in the press conferences here more so than normal. No.
Well, I'm not in the press conference, but from what I can witness as a consumer,
you have Mark.
Mark Weiner. Yeah, I have a reporter in Washington D.C. We're looking at trying to get access to some places that we haven't before.
Why don't you have access? Why wouldn't you have access?
Well, again, the press pool and the general White House concept has been designed to sort of feed national media. And so local papers, unless they're affiliated with larger organizations, have tended to have to scramble to get some of that access.
And I have a bit of theory about this. I've wondered whether or not, because he is not a traditional politician who's not used to having to deal with the press on a regular basis, not used to constantly being questioned, who comes to it from a place where it was entertainment and it's pretty much controlled by publicists, and now that's all changed. In the past, presidents have come up through the ranks of politics, and so they have grown accustomed to constantly going back and forth with the press, to having things that they say questioned.
So quickly, I'm running long on the segment, but quick. But so will he soften his approach to the press, in your opinion? Does he need to?
I hope that he will learn and that he will come to recognize that the press has a role to play, that it's not just beating up on the president or questioning everything that he says and does, but we're doing the work of the people.
Okay. So this sort of leads into the topic of bias. Now, I don't know if you've heard, Tim, but people say there might be a little bias in the news.
I've heard it.
You've heard it.
I've heard occasionally.
And again, I don't know that we're saying anything new here, but again, it just seems like we're hearing more. Oh, the media's bias. I don't know, I don't know if that's true or not, but I guess my thought to you would be, you have reporters in the field, Dean Branham, you train them, and I'm stating the obvious, but yeah, but reporters are human, and
Yeah, sure.
they would approach. I'm not, but they would approach any story or any issue with a certain set of opinions, beliefs, maybe a bias. It's hard to separate that out sometime, is it not? I mean, what do you tell your reporters?
Well, I think first, we've always looked at bias, and if we're getting criticized from the left and the right, we're somewhere in the middle, and I think and that's still generally true. I think the accusations of bias, today are generally, geared toward the national media and sort of the cable talk show.
But we see it here. You hear it locally, right?
You had your
yes.
Absolutely. But so from a bias perspective inside a newsroom, and Lorraine can chime in for sure. But I think we hire trained journalists that understand. Yeah, all humans have biases. We have editing processes. We have people to talk to. We have again processes that we want our reporters to go through to understand what they're reporting, what their biases may or may not be, to make sure that we're stripping that out, that we're reporting, and we're giving the facts, we're telling the story to the community. So we train our people to do that.
So in the classrooms and the studios of Newhouse, how are we teaching students to be more fair, less biased?
I'm glad that you used the word fair, because the whole bias issue always troubles me. This whole idea of objectivity. We really focus on the ethical foundations of journalism, and that includes this idea of fairness. We're teaching people to be fair, to get multiple sides of the story, to not just accept one side of the story. Everybody comes to everything with their own bias, but the thing about journalists, over time, and I've been in this business or connected to this business for 40 years, over time, you learn how to separate your personal feelings about the things that you're covering from your work. And if you can't do that, then ultimately you get out of the business.
But Dean Branham, not all journalists, not all reporters are perhaps doing that, though. Would you agree? I mean, there are certainly cases where...
Actually, I don't. Okay. And I think what has happened more now than ever in the past is there's so much opinion media that people tend to put it all together. The people who are out there who are paid to have opinions and who are clearly have a point of view get confused with...
That's exactly an issue I did want to talk about. And look, I'm mindful, we're in a Fox studio. Sure. This is not Fox News. So everyone, you've got Fox News on one end and MSNBC on the other.
Yes. And neither of them are what I consider the news media.
Well, that's where I'm going. So, is it? I guess it is necessary to have the different fragmentations, but it seems like people are drawn to one or the other because they want a certain type of news. Am I saying that properly?
Yes,
you think?
I do.
Not a good idea in your view, or not a good policy?
Well, I don't know that there's anything we can do about it other than I constantly try to remind people that MSNBC and Fox News have a bunch of people who have opinions about what's going on in the world. They are not journalists. Journalists have a different job, and they go about doing their jobs in a very different way, in a way in which they try to be fair, they try to present all of the sides, and they try not to allow their own personal views to become a part of the story.
So this is one of the I want to jump in. Yeah. This is one of the things that troubles me. We use the word media. You've used the word media. Everyone talks about media as though it is one thing.
Exactly.
And media is. Again, if you have an agenda, you want to call the media out. You use that word, but the media consists of all kinds of things. The press, the traditional press, the media can be somebody on a Twitter platform. People use that word to mean everything and anything, and it is not generally what we do as a journalistic-based organization.
But you used the word agenda, and it just triggered. I forgot to ask a question. Here it goes, and I pulled this right out of Post Standard. I want to read you something, if you'll forgive me. Cal Thomas, syndicated columnist, wrote a piece,
and opinion piece.
An opinion piece.
Absolutely.
On the opinion, in the opinion section.
Not a journalist.
Right. Well, okay, but I've got a question to follow up on this, if you'll allow. Excuse me one moment. So he says here. It's just a sentence. Few people, he said, would deny the right or the obligation of journalists to be skeptical. But, he says, in too many instances, skepticism becomes cynicism. And isn't there a fine line there? And that's what I'm getting at. When we get accusations of bias, it's okay to be skeptical. I think we want our reporters asking the tough questions, but sometimes it's how they ask, or is there a hidden agenda there?
Well, I don't think there is. I think, again, we train and we talk all the time about how to ask a question, how to get to the story, what are we really trying to do here. Healthy skepticism is a part of it. I mean, there's the old, it's an old saw in journalism. Comes back to the old Chicago News Bureau when new reporters would start, and they'd say, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. So there's a and behind a great old saw, right? Well, I think the idea is,
and we still say that in classes.
And why? So
you're making me question my whole upbringing.
Ask somebody else. But I think the point is exactly that, which is, be skeptical, find the facts, find a secondary source. That is all journalism.
Hold on, let me
years.
take the other side of that, though, and try to look at both sides, because I was a fan and continue to have great respect for some of the old names. Tom Brokaw, who was the anchor for NBC Nightly News for many years, retired in 2004. And among other things, when he signed off, and I don't even have to look, I remember this so well, and I'll probably have it quote almost to the punctuation mark, but he said this, Dean Branham, he said, it's not the questions that get us into trouble, it's the answers. And I thought, well, you know what, I like that. And if you subscribe to that thinking, shouldn't we allow our reporters to ask anything then and not worry about being accused of bias? Because it's not the questions, it's what's that answer going to bring? Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. And in fact, I think the questions are the key. I mean, we are trying to get information. We are trying to find out what someone thinks, what someone's going to do, and this is their job. And if you have problems with the answer, if you think they're not being wholly truthful, then you have to continue to ask the question or find a different way to ask the question or repeat the question. And sometimes people see that as being impolite or overly aggressive, but you're trying to get at information, and sources are not always as forthcoming as you would like for them to be.
I
think
agree.
yes. And so sometimes
I'm not having that problem today with you two, but I agree that
sometimes reporters have to become a little more aggressive to get what they're trying to get.
Okay. So this kind of moves into, we go from bias to the new term now, fake news, and this is really out of the mouth of President Trump, accusing of either exaggerated stories or flat out untrue stories.
Is fake news like alternative facts?
You can't ask me questions. It doesn't work that way. But so that's been the criticism, and I'm gathering from your response that you don't buy into that. No. You don't.
No.
Does he have any leg to stand on?
Well,
because if you are to believe what he's saying, some of what is being put out there is not factual.
Well, I'll go. I think, and I've said this before. Fake news, in my opinion, is fake criticism, because what it is, and the way you see it used, is again in a general, broad, sweeping. This is fake news, and it seems to now apply to everything from what I would call non-news, which is just kind of made-up news by maybe somebody on a website in Eastern Europe.
Don't even get me.
Or you'll see people use fake news when they are criticizing a story that may have a particular position they don't like. Or you see fake news being the accusation when you make an honest mistake that you then go back again in our world and we would correct with a correction. So fake news is sort of now this whole thing that to me is fake criticism.
That was the allegation, Dean Branham, that when he was bringing up the president, was bringing up the fake news, was the comments were being made. Well, we fact check the politicians. Who's fact checking the reporters? And I don't know where we're going with that, but
I would love for people to fact check the reporters.
Okay,
go right ahead and fact check the reporters. But that's part of what we do, is fact check. I mean, people come out and they make statements and they make allegations, and if the press is not there to then go and verify that information for the public, then because the public doesn't have the time or often the resources to go and find out what is real and what's not. That's part of our job.
Dean Branham, here's my problem with all of this, though. Here's my worry, and I'm dying to hear what you say about this. But the worry that I have is when we start talking about fake news and bias in the news and this and that, and fact checking the reporters, that you know, over time that has a tendency to reduce the trust that we place, and I'm going to use it, in the media.
In the media.
And some would say, well, look, you know, we went from a period of time when Walter Cronkite sat at the CBS anchor desk, CBS Evening News, most trusted man in America, to where we are today. And I worry that if that continues, I mean, I don't see anything good coming of that. So somehow or another, we've got to reverse that trend, don't you think? And trust has to, I don't know, and maybe it's been taken away, some of it's been taken away incorrectly, but some of that trust has to be restored. How do we do it?
I agree, and it's one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I'm not sure how we do it because there does seem to be this divide. I mean, if you look at the studies and reports that have been done, I mean, that erosion of trust has been something that has been happening over time. Perhaps,
but we've looked to journalists, we've looked to reporters over the years for
years, and so we have to figure out, how do we regain the public's trust? How do we help the public realize that we truly are there doing public service, that journalists take this job very seriously. Nobody gets into this business for money. They don't pay a lot. People get into this business because they want to make a difference, because they want to try to be a truth teller, because they want to serve the public. And I think perhaps we don't talk about that part of the jobs that we do enough.
Sure. Let me move on to a whole other area, and this has to do maybe with, and appreciate the conversation so far, but has to do more with the changes that have taken place, Tim, and will probably continue to take place. I joke, you know, I'm a newspaper guy.
So am I.
Well, but you have to be. You know,
I love to be.
I go to lunch at Riley's, and I've got the paper under my arm, and I enjoy the paper. I'm not your future, though, am I? You're not really concerned. I mean, I'd say this, but I'm not where your future is in your business.
Well, you are, and you're not. I think I've said many times, I think, you know, it's easier to think about where this business is going to be in 10 or 20 years than where it's going to be in the next 10 minutes. But you know, the reality is today we have to do both things extremely well. We have to put out a great local newspaper, which we do. Post-Standard Sunday readership is among the highest in the country.
I read that. I think, you know, I should have asked you about that.
I mean, this has always been a great newspaper. Well, this has always been a great newspaper reading town.
Okay.
And I think we continue. I am biased, but we continue to put out a terrific newspaper. And I think you see those results. But at the same time, while we do that, we have to gear our organization and sort of focus the organization on the future, which is digital.
Yeah.
You know, the explosion of platforms, the explosion of devices in people's pockets.
Okay.
People are getting news and information everywhere.
Hold on, Dean Branham, because here's where I have two daughters, one in college, one close to being in college. They'll talk to me about news, the news of the day. Oh, Dad, did you hear about this? Dean Branham, I've not seen them read a paper. They're not watching the CBS Evening News. They're getting it off websites, some of which I've never heard of. And here's, again, it's all about me, right? But my problem is I question the reliability, I question the credibility of some of these sites. Is this where they're going?
Well, we are going that way. What was the latest figure? 44% of people get their news from Facebook. I mean, social media has had a tremendous impact on news. And to go back to your previous question,
that has to kill you.
When there were newspapers, I think they were such a part of the community that there was this innate trust because they were part of your community.
Right.
And so people believed what they read in their local newspaper. And now I think because news comes from so many different sources, some of them questionable, that there's a skepticism about it that perhaps we did not have 40 or 50 years ago when we had a bunch of local newspapers and they were a part of the community.
But just to wrap up this, again, we're tight on time, but with the whole issue of online reports, I mean, once it's on, any idiot can put something online. I can say, well, Tim, I saw an online report that Dean Branham hates Syracuse, she's leaving SU. What? Well, I saw it was online. I mean, that's what I get to with the credibility issue, right?
But you know, in some ways, the only thing that's changed is the platform and the delivery device, right? So, you know, you wouldn't see that report on Syracuse.com. And so I don't know where we would see that report, but you know, is there a world where the buyer has to be where they're getting their news and information and understand clearly? But brands matter. Okay, brands matter. The Syracuse.com brand, the Post-Standard brand, you know. Any so-called traditional press or traditional media, those brands still stand for something, and they mean something in the online world.
Here's where you and I are probably going to get in a little fisticuffs, and I hope that Dean Branham backs me up on this when I'm winking. But you mentioned Syracuse.com.
Right.
This is my ambush question for you. So get ready.
Okay.
I've had guests sitting in that chair, or where you are, Jim Boeheim, Congressman Katko, and others, and inevitably I'll say, well, there's a report written about you, and did you see the comments on Syracuse.com? And they all say they don't read the comments.
You're talking about the comments, not the report.
I'm talking about the comments,
Okay,
correct.
right,
This is where I'm going.
All right, okay.
I love the comments.
Well, but here's my and I want to be serious. Here's my criticism. I mean, it just seems like some of them that get on there are borderline vitriol. I mean,
they are.
Sure.
They are. And so my question to you, in fairness, is A, how do you allow some of those to go on, and B, why don't you demand us to sign our names to those comments? When I can do something anonymously, I can say just about anything, and that bothers me, right?
And they do.
Yep. Well, so I think a couple things. Again, not an ambush question. I mean, it is a question that I get quite a bit. I think the comments, there is a lot of vitriol, right? And there are trolls, and there is.
It's awful.
In all of social media.
Thank you. So in all social media. So you mentioned
but
comments.
I want to hold Syracuse.com to a higher standard than other forms of social media.
And I appreciate that, and we want to be there. But I'll go back to what you said about sort of identifying yourself. I mean, if you look at the conversation, so we post a lot of stories on Facebook. And if you see the dialogue on Facebook for some stories that we, especially again the crime stories and stories like that, the Facebook discussion is sometimes worse than the comment section. So I don't think that the idea of identification solves the problem. And then at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is have dialogue, and sometimes there is really good dialogue that occurs in the comment section. We do get leads, we do get tips, we do get people who are sharing part of the story that we did not have, who are able to tell their side. And there are a number of instances. Again, whether it is, let's say a story about a high school, and you're going to have high school kids that will get in and tell you part of the story that you didn't know, and they're certainly not going to identify themselves. So there are people in this community that I know that are in the comment section that don't want to identify themselves because of the repercussions. So I get it, but I think that and we need to improve it. Maybe technology will be part of the solution, but
I think a human editor is part of the solution, and a lot of people don't want to invest in that. But I think there does have to be some oversight of these comment sections.
Well,
I want to give people some freedom to say what they think, but I also think that some of these comments go too far, and they should just
that's
be
an understatement.
They should just be removed.
Just to jump in, I mean, we have human. I mean, again, in the Syracuse.com example, we have human editors. We have technology that edits, and a lot of the comments are about why did you delete my comment?
Yeah.
And you get into a lot of that. So we try to dive in.
You understand? They're yelling at me. Okay,
so
hold on. Last question or two. I mean, it's 2 minutes. This is the lightning round. I talked about my daughters, years out, 5 years out or longer. Dean Branham, and you're teaching students at Newhouse, I'm sure. Where will that generation obtain their news? Where will they go for reliable, good journalism?
I have ceased worrying about the platforms, because there's not a lot we can do about it. Things are going to continue to evolve. People will continue to get their news from different places. I'm really focused on turning out people who are good journalists and who understand what good reporting is, who understand the ethical foundations, who understand the values that you're supposed to have as an aspiring journalist and a young reporter. I think that is good writing. I think that is what has to be important, because who knows what technology is going to bring about. So I think the focus has to be on journalism and maintaining good journalism and continuing to turn out ethical, truthful, fact-seeking journalists who can do a good job.
Okay. She went long, so you don't get the final word. I'm sorry, it's not my fault. We've got time enough to say thank you.
And we want it to be us.
We have time enough to say thank you to the both of you, because I could have. I could have gone on another hour, but Tim Kennedy. Thank you so much, President, Syracuse Media Group and Advanced Media New York. A pleasure having you on. I suspect we can pick this topic up again, but I appreciate you joining us today.
Happy to do it. You're
Lorraine
welcome.
Branham, pleasure meeting you as well. Dean of the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University. Terrific having you with us also. May I remind you, please, visit us at foxsyracuse.com. Send us your questions, emails, comments, criticisms, ideas about this show as well. We do read the comments, and I'd like to see them. That's it for this edition of Central. From all of us here at Fox 68 and My 43, I'm Daniel Pluff. Thanks for watching.